Hey, welcome to CSS Sandbox. Hopefully this is the first video you're watching here, and you've gotten to it by clicking on this button in the lower right corner of the var dash dash what am I question mark inside parentheses window card. Now the site might look a little different right now than what it does in this video, and that's only because this is the really early stages of me making the site. And I just want to make the videos as I go a little bit, because there's going to be a number of these videos that you can watch throughout the site. But they're all going to be kind of like button activated and hidden a little bit. So they're not going to be like in your face. They're optional. But this first video is just going to talk about the cards here, and a little bit about the site and why I'm doing it. I've been coding for a little over a month now, and I feel like I've finally gotten the skills to put together like a decent multi-page website. And this is what I'm going to do. It's going to be a learning tool and kind of interactive, so you can have a little fun with CSS, and maybe take away like a little bit here and there, depending on your skill level. Maybe you already know a lot and this is just like review. But for someone just coming into coding like I was a little over a month ago, this would have been pretty cool just to see like, okay, CSS is what? Like, so CSS is the style. But encompassed in style is so many things. Position, transformations, on top of the normal stuff you think of like color. You know, there's a lot more to CSS. So this slider right here is going to move this yellow ball. You pull it all the way up, it goes over. Halfway, it goes halfway. So how does that work? Well, if we'll use the console. On my keyboard, I hit Control, Shift, and I, and I get the console, or I get the developer tools, and then inside of that, I get the console. You also get the elements and a bunch of other stuff. So I've got it logging in the value. I did a console log. That's a JavaScript thing. But when this moves, it's going to log the new value. So I just go like that. Okay, 65. 159, 300, 30. So basically, and you can use the arrows, 31, 32, 33, you know. So all that is controlling the position. In CSS, there's something called position. And I define this as relative position for the ball. And we can show it. You can go to sources, and we can prove it to you. You got this element. Let's click the ball. So you go and click this button, and that lets you go by element. So I go, bam, and then it brings up that ball. So here it is, position relative, and then left. That's defining how far away it is from the left hand of the page, and also the top, but that's not important. But since it's relative, that means that it's being defined by its parent element. It's positioned relative to its parent element, which in this case is the box around it, not the whole page. If it was absolute for position, these coordinates of top and left would be in relationship to the full page, which is 0, 0 starting up here and working its way out left and top, and also bottom and right, but we're just using left and top. You notice left, it says var dash dash box 1 left in parentheses, and that's a function inside of CSS. And all that's basically saying is, instead of a number like -30, for the top. Left is being defined by this function of variable, and this is the variable name right here, dash dash box left, box one left. All variables in CSS have dash dash in front of them. And if you go into sources, styles, index process CSS, I have a list of the variables that I'm using on this site so far. And right there is box one left, initial value 30 pixels. But in my JavaScript, I've selected the ID of column 1, which is the slider element itself. And with jQuery UI, I've defined a bunch of different properties here inside of an object. Classes, orientation, vertical, you see that means it's going up and down. It animates slow, and then its max is 300, it's min is 30. Step is how many it goes every time you would tap the keyboard, so forth and so on. Initial value 30, which if you remember matches that. And how are they linked together? You can add methods, functions basically, to the slider itself in jQuery UI. Now this function, and all the functions are of the parameters are the event and the UI. And in this case, jQuery selector, column 1 box by ID, that's the ball with a 50% border radius to make it a circle. .css, that's just a way to define the CSS. And I've entered in the name of the variable, dash dash box one left, comma, UI.value plus pixel. So for this change function, for the .css method, the first parameter is the property that you want to change, and the second parameter is the new value. So I'm just saying UI.value, and then the pixels is just an addendum to make sure that it has the right units, because the value doesn't have the units. And then there's my console log that we saw earlier. So all this does is every time this value changes, the slider, meaning every time you move it, it's going to run this function, .css of box 1. The box left property of box 1 is going to be reassigned to whatever that UI value is. And UI value is just the value of the slider based on a minimum of 30, a maximum of 300, step of 1, initial value 30. And it's just going to update that every single time we do it. So it's down at 30, 300, 30, 300, somewhere in the middle. And if we console logged it, we could find out exactly what that value is. But that's how you tie everything together. So your CSS variable is working with your JavaScript, is working with your HTML input element. And under regular HTML circumstances, that would be an input with a type of range. But since I'm using jQuery UI, that's what enhances the look of it. They have kind of their own library. They've added a different look to all the input elements. And you define it a little differently like you saw in there. I define it just with a div, and then I use the slider method on the div. And within that slider method, I define all the different stuff. So basically, it's just fun to play with. And it's just a very basic example of the power you have over these variables. You use CSS variables and know a little bit of JavaScript. You can do quite a bit with it. And that's that. Enjoy the site.